My name's Tom, and at the end of 2022, I did a Reaper video on using the free Neural Amp Modeler, or NAM. And since then, a lot of changes have happened. So it's now the 9th of April. NAM is becoming incredibly popular quite quickly. So the Facebook group has grown from under 100 people to over 3,000. And there's been a lot of changes and progressions with the software itself, a lot of new features. And as it's an open source software, which anybody can just download from GitHub, a lot of enthusiasts and developers have also started adding their own features or making their own suggestions and coming up with ways you can improve it. So in this video, I wanted to go through some of those changes and also address some of the other suggestions people have made about how this could be improved and progress in the future. So when I did the video, this is how it looked. It's absolute bare bones. So it's basically just a way of loading up the profile or capture, and then you can control the input and output, and that was it. It now looks like this. So you've got an EQ section added. You've got a noise gate, and you can load up IRs as well directly through here. So one thing to bear in mind that these are captures or profiles. So the bass, middle, and treble won't work like they would on an amp. They're not actually changing the basic sound characteristics. It's just working the same way as if you applied a basic EQ after a recording of an amp in Reaper or something, if it's just a very basic one. But I'm going to show you a slightly more sophisticated way of controlling the EQ later on if you do want that. Generally, I prefer to actually I found it sounds better just using the straight captures. And then if you want to do any fine tuning, actually just do that through the IRs, other than just the basic low pass and high pass. So I also did download another version, which this is on the YouTube channel D3NEB, and he's been making some changes to himself, which he's got demos with on his channel. So the most simple thing, which is actually quite useful, is that you can actually just switch backwards and forwards using these arrows. So if you've got several in a folder, you don't have to keep opening it up again. You can just click through to quickly open it. But this bit here, this is connected to a web service which connects to a repository of the actual capture files. So this is all still in development. This is all still early days. So it's namtones.net, and there's just some examples ones up there. And when he's using it in his videos, it all works fine. But I downloaded it and it wasn't working properly for me. And there's also supposed to be just a VST version, which just have the arrows, and that wasn't there yet. But that was literally only came up about 6 days ago. So by the time you watch this may well all be sorted and improved and progressed and ready to go. So this is something to keep an eye on. So there's a lot of interesting developments going on. Another interesting development, which only came out yesterday, is Matthijs Ebley from Shameless Plugs just put this up. So this is designed to be used, well, it could be used with any kind of amp or anything, or but it's specifically done with a view, I think, for using it within NAM. And it basically works like maybe you might have a preamp pedal, which you could either put in front of the amp or you could put in the effects loop. So it gives you greater control over the actual frequencies boost there, and then you can actually tweak the actual ranges here as well. This isn't going to change the actual amp sound of the capture itself, and pushing it in front won't make any difference because that's already set. But this does give you a bit of extra tonal control. So it's something worth checking out and trying for yourself. So these changes did inevitably led on to talking about what other things people might want to see incorporated within NAM in the future. So probably the most obvious one is just the actual GUI itself. So at the moment it is still fairly bare bones, but people have started adding in or giving examples of suggestions of how it might look. So I think probably my favourite one is this one from Evan Heritage so far. He put up on the Facebook group. So it's still sort of fairly conventional, but it's easy to understand. It looks clean. It looks nice. I like the idea of including the tuner as well on it, so bringing it on. So something like this might be incorporated into the official version in the future, or if anybody else has got any better suggestions or other ideas, it would be cool to put them in the comments. And I do have some other ideas of slightly different approaches towards the GUI or interface, but I'm going to come back to those towards the end of the video. So another thing which came up, something desirable to add, would be oversampling. So I'm a little bit skeptical about the way that oversampling is often thought of as some kind of magic button that just makes everything better, in the same way that digital used to, or AI is now. Because arguably, if the software is well written enough, you don't need it. So in some companies like Sound Toys, I think they would argue that you don't need oversampling if it's good enough. Inevitably, there might be some people who are sort of audio nerds who will use their Doctor plugin or whatever to show that there is aliasing and corruption and going on after the Nyquist frequency, and they can show it in the graph. But if you can't actually hear it and the plugin sounds good, I don't think that matters. And also, you do get people talking about, oh, what's the aliasing like on your Bit Crusher plugin, which is kind of nonsensical. It's the whole point of something, say, like a Bit Crusher would be to reduce the sample rate to create a certain sound. But having said all that, I did do some experimenting with oversampling, and I actually got surprisingly good results. So I'm going to come back to that later. So another thing which did come up is it would be nice to have dual amp blocks and dual cab blocks, which could also run in stereo or mono or dual mono, which is different. So all these things you can do in Reaper. So this is getting to the Reaper bit. So you can set all these up and you can do quite complex chains and quite complex combinations, either using Reaper effects chain, which would just be all on one track, or in the example I'm going to give in a bit, I'm actually using a Reaper track template. So that's on more than one track, but that just makes it easier to see what's going on with the routing and where everything is going. So on some of the more sophisticated modelers like AxeFX or Helix, one of the things a lot of people really like about and talk about is they really like the power you have with routing and the combinations you can do that. So I've got a screenshot here of AxeFX, like a typical setting I would use for a dual amp one. So as I go through this, you should also bear in mind that everything you can do in the AxeFX or the Helix, you can do just in your DAW in Reaper. And I'm going to go through and give an example of how you would set that up in a few minutes. But as a comparison on this, your signal would go into the front. You've got a built-in noise gate. You can add in noise gate blocks as well, but you generally only need to do that if you're, say, using it in 4-channel method and using like real preamps or using real amps. And then one side goes off to the left side, one side goes off to the right. So they're hard left and hard right on those two sides there. And then you can have scene selects. So you can use scene selects to turn on blocks which aren't on. So if I say do the solo version, this would be a rhythm one, then I turn off that one and I turn on these. And then you can also switch between, say, 2 different drives on each one, 2 different amps, you can have an A1 and a B1 for each block, and for the cabs as well. And you can run the cabs in, you can have 2 lots of cabs at the same time, or you can have 1 lot of cab in the other one. So you can have quite a big combinations, which you switch between through scene selects. So that is something you could either automate through, say, Reaper. You can use automation to switch between the scenes at different parts of a song, or you could use something like a MIDI pedal, and you can use that. You can assign the controls to a MIDI pedal, so you can switch between themselves. And all this again you can do in Reaper. So this is a relatively simple example. Other thing I should mention on this, if you're wondering why there's a delay there, what this is doing is adding a very short delay between one side, and then that creates a really big sound. So if you've got your one speaker over one side and one over the other, then this creates a big epic sound. It's not necessarily the best for if you want to have like that sort of like really hard immediate sort of djenty type sound. And this isn't necessarily going to work for you, but if you just like a big full guitar sound, this is something definitely worth trying. So you can get quite a bit more complex on this, and you can start using, so this is an example of like using a synth guitar one. So you've got some quite weird routing on this. And what you can also do is you have the controllers here. So the controllers could be something like, it could be like a wah-wah pedal, which you connect up with MIDI, and you control, say, a filter which goes across to reproduce that. Or you could also use built-in controllers like LFOs. So an LFO would send a pulse. So then you could, say, do an auto wah, so that it would move it backwards and forwards in time to the music. So it's syncing with a BPM and move across. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show how I've set up similar things to work in Reaper and to work with NAMM. So what I've got is I've got one I made earlier. So to add that in, you just do insert track from template, NAMM effects chain. Right, here you go. So what you've got on here, again, you've got hard left, hard right, different amp models in each one. And then from the routing, these go back out to the master, which you can do the master volume. And then it also gets sent to a post effect. So here it would be where you would put anything in you would use in your effects chain, or after the amp. So I'm just going to go through, these are basically the same on each side. So I'm just going to show you what I've got in them. So I'm not using the noise gate in NAMM because this is one I've just been doing myself. So this is going to be like a WitchPig plugin, which I'll put up soon on the witchpig.co.uk site. So this is a noise gate expander. So the difference of expander is that if you don't want to completely reduce the noise down, so it's a bit more versatile than just a straight noise gate. I've then got put any drives in you want to go before the amp. So this is again Siberian Hamster, WitchPig one, and then I've got 2 different instances of the actual NAMM. So this one, this is one of my favorite ones I've loaded. This is a wizard one with Mud Killer built in. So some of them don't have the overdrives built in. So if the overdrive isn't built in, then what I'll do is I'll add, you can use another instance of NAMM and have an overdrive pedal in that, and then have the main amp in this one. In this case, it's turned off because it's got the actual overdrive sort of baked in to the actual amp sound as well. Then after that, I'm using the IRs. So I'm using the Ignites ones, which is a free amp loader. So I think everything in here is free apart from the Engel Ownhammer IR I'm using. So with this one, you can run it in stereo, dual mono or mono. I'm using a high pass and low pass of this on these amps. So this is just a fairly standard rolling off the very low end or the very high end, which you don't really need and which doesn't really add anything and just gets in the way of the other instruments. And then if you remember in the Axe Effects screenshot I showed you, what you can also do if you want to is you can add delay onto it. So you can add a delay between the left hand side and the right hand side, and that will help create that bigger sound. So what I'll include in the description of the video as well, but I'll include links for everything I mentioned in there, but I'll also include some links to some really good free IRs. So I mean, a lot of people would argue that the actual impulse responses are as important to the sound as the actual amp itself. I mean, yeah, it does make a big difference. So I'll include some links to some good ones as well, so that you can download for free. Right, so this leads on the end of the chain to the oversampling. So I mentioned this earlier and said I was a bit skeptical because the actual sampling rate is baked into the actual creation, not even in the actual neural amp modeler interface itself. It's when you actually go to the server and upload it. This is set at 48. So you can't really change that or oversample at that point. Or maybe you can, but I don't know how to. And in the actual, but it's too late to do it, proper oversampling in the actual neural amp modeler application. But what I actually did with this is I found this free software. I'll give you a link to this as well. And what this is using oversampling, but it's actually an oversampling digital filter. So what it does is that rather than stopping any aliasing happening in the first instance, what it does is it oversamples afterwards. It works out what the Nyquist frequency is, which is the frequency at which the sample rate can't reliably handle the information anymore and can start to create aliasing, which could be the form of like just hissing noises, glitchy noises, things you don't want. So it figures out at what point that starts to happen, and then it just filters it out. And I was a little bit skeptical about this, but I tried it and it works really well. So as I mentioned before, one of the things with oversampling is it does create extra CPU usage. So you want to use the minimum you need to. So I found that although 4 times was better than 2 times, you couldn't hear any difference for 8 times or 16 or 32. So you want to keep this on 4 times. And yeah, it's definitely worth giving it a go. Right, so after these ones, these 2 are then routed to effects section here. So what I've got in here, I've got some other WitchPig plugins. So you've got Guillotine in here, and then I've got SBX Nevermore one here. So this is quite a good example of the sort of thing I was talking about with oversampling would be pointless. So this is trying to replicate the symphonic preset in the SPX 90 from Yamaha, which is like a 90s, end of 90s rack unit, which was only 12-bit and was notoriously noisy. But what I found is that if I added that extra noise and I reduced the bit rate before putting it into the flanger, then that helped to recreate that sound. So that noise and that low bit rate was what actually helped to create the sound. So what you're reducing is you're basically halving the sample rate. So to use oversampling on something like that would be completely pointless because you're actually using less samples to get the sound you want. As that aliasing and that extra noise is part of what gives it its extra character. So oversampling isn't necessarily going to make everything sound better, and it's often quite pointless. But what is actually technically an oversampling based filter, which I did use, did work really well. So, okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to recreate another one myself. I'm going to create another chain just to show you how to set up all the routing. So I'll just delete these, and then I'll do insert new track, and do the effects chain. So I'm going to do slightly differently on this. So I will do, I'll add in a noise gate. I mean, I'm not going to bother doing the distortion of the other one, but what I'm going to do is, if you remember, I said you can save effects chains. So I think with this one, I'm going to add in like a wah-wah pedal type thing. So if I go to add effects chain, I should be able to find one I added. Oh, it's at the top. Yeah, there you go. So here you go. So what this is doing, this is actually a bit more complicated than just a straight wah-wah. So I've got a video on how to create like a wah-wah type pedal, how to emulate it within Reaper. But this is actually doing two lots. So actually you can see you've got actually two different lots of waves going backwards different time. And if you remember, I talked about modifiers or controls. What I'm using on this one is I'm using an LFO. So that will sync hop in time. So it's on tempo sync with the music. So using a triangle wave, and then you've got two different ones. So this will create an effect. So wah-wahs would generally go in front, but you could use this afterwards as well. So once you have your basic templates, you can also create effects chains for any effects you want. So you don't have to load them all up. So if you want a wah-wah, say auto wah on it, you just do add effects change and add it in, and there you go. It's all ready to go. So what am I going to add in next? NAM, that would help. So okay, just loading that in. So then I'll have to, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn the EQ off. I'll select a model. When it gets going, okay, I have to click there. So I've got various folders in here. I've got a good one which was like called heavy tones. So I think I'll go for these are all good ones. I'll go for the dual recto red mud killer. Right. And then I've also, if you remember, I saved this effects change, all the cabs. So add effects chain. So these are the ones, so I don't have to keep doing them over and over again. This time I'll use orange and diesel cab. Okay, and then I want to add in over aliasing bit, if I can remember what it's called. So if I look at the recently used ones, okay, I'll add that in. So then what you can do is you just duplicate that. And then I'm going to put hard left, hard right. And then I'm going to insert another track. Post effects. Okay, so I'll just add in one on that. I'll add in a okay, I'm going to add in Medusa. So this is a chorus and flanger pedal, another which big one. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a new track under here. Now I'm going to put this on top here. And then if you click here, you can put those under there, and just to change it, so I'll just call that master. And you can change the color on that as well. Track color, I'll just choose any color will do. Okay. And then what you need to do is you need to do the routing bit. So you need to send them where you want to go. So if I go to route, so for the master one, I want to take in, I want to do receive. So I want to actually bring in all those. So I want to bring in left, right, post effects. And then on post effects, I want to bring in these two on here. So do route, do receive, do left, right. Okay, so now that's all set up to go. And you can just reproduce that. So now when you've done that, what you do, just select them all. And then go to save track as template. So what I'm going to do this is call this Wah Nam, because I've got my Wah effects chain in it. So then you've got another one. So then you can remove all those. And then when you want to add it in, you just go insert track from template. There you go, Wah Nam. It's all there. And yeah, so that's how you can do that. You can control it all by MIDI. You control it with your foot pedal. You can control all the different parameters as well through automation. So if you're not sure on how to set up the effects templates and do some of the other ones, I've got Reaper videos on those, so you can check those out. And I go into more detail on those and also show some more complex things you can do with those. So the other thing I was going to bring up is another question which people brought up, is about actually building it into a physical pedal. So there are some people who have already been doing these things. So probably the best person to look for and to look at his YouTube channel and his website is Guitar ML from Keith Bloomer, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. But he's done a lot of it. So he also created something very similar to NAMM called Proteus. And in some ways, he's actually taken it a bit further, because he's been doing captures of, say, pedals, where instead of just being a set capture, what you do is you do multiple captures for the same pedal with, say, different settings for the drive section. And then you can actually add real control through the GUI he's done, so that it switches between the different captures depending on moving the knob. So that's a step on from that. And he also started building hardware pedals using like various different technologies. So I mean, it started with the Raspberry Pi, and then there's a more expensive one he bought, which seemed quite a lot, but a much more affordable one, which he's just done a recent video for, is Neural Seed. So I had a look at that, and you can buy the board from that. It's not that expensive at all, and you can buy like the housing and stuff for about £5, or if you have it pre-drilled, I think it works out about £10. And then I think the board is about, I think it's under £20 or so. So it's under about $20. And you could actually create an actual physical pedal. So that's something which is definitely worth mentioning as well. And yeah, so check out, again, I'll include links. So have a look at his videos and see if that's something you're interested in. Right, so the other thing, going back to the GUIs. So at the same time as a lot of these audio technologies have been growing enormously quickly, there's also been a lot of talk recently about AI and using it for visual technology. So probably most famously Midjourney. And I did have a go at that. but you get a limited amount of credits. So this one is actually something similar, which is Lexica. So I tried actually creating some different AMP models on here. So I'll just give you a quick look through of some of the ones of the different prompts. So you can see in the top left, you can see what I was putting as a prompt. So the way it works is you just put in a series of words, and then you can refine it and get different versions. So I'll just give you a quick flick through of some of these. Some more successful than others. It's very difficult to get them exactly how you want. And it's difficult to get the buttons. So one of the big problems is I did try looking at it to do an effects pedal before, or sort of, sorry, to do graphics for an effects pedal. But the trouble is that you'd have the light on it in a certain way and you couldn't control it, and you can never get it quite right. So it would be good for getting ideas for doing designs, but you would still need to do a lot of work on it afterwards. So that might be difficult if you want to do quick, easy changes and add in extra controls. That could mean a lot of faffing about. If you've settled on a standard design, then that's probably okay. But otherwise, it might be a pain. But it's a good way of getting some different ideas or different approaches, or coming up with things which are a bit more sophisticated or a bit more interesting and varied than you might otherwise come up with. So unfortunately with this, they didn't tell you when you're running out of credits from your free ones. So I couldn't do the most high quality ones, but I've got some bigger ones here, which you can see. But it gives you an idea of the sort of things you could do. But having said this, all the GUI designs we've looked at so far, they've either been straightforward, normal computer GUI designs or emulations of making it look like a guitar amplifier. But there's no reason why you can't do something completely different. You don't have to make it look like a guitar amp or look like a standard VST. So you could do something like make it look like a giant robotic space worm. So there is someone who's been doing some very interesting things with GUI designs on PianoBook. So on PianoBook, if you're not familiar with it, you can download free sample libraries for Contact, Decent Sampler, other things. And I think Owen Bollig on there has been doing some of the most interesting work on there, which you can all download for free. And what he's been doing is he's using Blender and doing 3D graphics on it. So what I'll do is I'll give you an example of some of these, and just to give you an idea of some of the possibilities. Okay, so in this first example, which is done, this is all done in Blender. So you can see you get a 3D effect for that. So you can all connect it up. So you can make some really impressive GUIs doing this. How practical it is if you want to make easy changes all the time and you're not familiar with it is another matter. So Steve might not be keen on those ideas, but you can do some really cool stuff. But a step on from this is a newer one, Portals, which is using sort of more like 3D animations as well. So it's take a while to load up. Oh, hang on, it probably has. I just need to get rid of it. Okay, so with this one, you can see if you press on the notes, it moves it around. So I think these look really cool and really interesting. You have the extra controls which you click up and do it. You can choose random things, the other ones. So anyway, if you want to have a look at some more interesting ideas, and you could, so doing something like this, you can use Blender, which again is free. It would probably take a while to learn those skills to do it, but I thought this was something which was worth mentioning because that just opens up a whole load of other possibilities. Okay, so I think that's pretty much covered everything I wanted to do in the video. If you've got any other ideas, if you've got some better ideas for GUIs, or you've done some more developments yourself, please put them in the comments in the video. If you want, I'll include links in the description to everything I've used. If you want to try out some of my own plugins I've done, then check out witchpig.co.uk. So if you're still watching it at this stage, thanks for watching. Cheers. Bye.